What are you doing? What in God's name are you doing, Sony? Have you lost your minds? Have you lost the plot of everything here? And this is from the company themselves, the presentation, the showcase, the things that have been happening after it, the fan base of it now. What is wrong with this entire ecosystem known as Sony right now? Because there's a big problem. And these problems seem to keep coming up and arising, and people are coping with this stuff and coming up with different reasonings and ideas for why things were or why things weren't the way they were. And I just want to talk about all this stuff today and kind of probably upset some people. But the real Sony fans, the real Sony diehards, the ones who like the company for the games they produce, they'll agree with me on this. They'll be completely satisfied with this video, and they'll completely understand where I'm coming from, because it's coming from the same place that they're coming from on this. So obviously, it hasn't been the best week for Sony. They had a showcase, which we'll touch on in a little bit. They had some announcements there. They had a bit of a fallout from the showcase. Then the whole situation with Naughty Dog coming out with this. Supposedly there was this, that, and the other reasonings for the showcase quality, whatever. We're going to go over all of these things, and I'm going to dissect all of these things and prove to you what the actual truth is with these situations. But before we get into that, I want to pose a question. And this is a very interesting question, I think. Can you tell me of one positive thing that has happened for Sony under the Jim Ryan era? Obviously, Sean Layden was mysteriously booted as the head of the company, and in his place came Jim Ryan. Jim Ryan basically inherited what the PlayStation 4 and previous consoles had built up. The PlayStation 4 was a dominant console. PlayStation was a dominant brand. Some of the best and highest rated games were available on the PlayStation 4. It was a constant barrage of high quality first-party titles and third-party titles on that system. The system sold extremely well as well, absolutely dominated its nearest competitor with the Xbox One system, and it was just smooth sailing for Sony. And then we got into the PlayStation 5, the unveiling of the PlayStation 5. These games can only be played with the power of the PlayStation 5, except for all the multi-platforms. And that's where Lion Jim Ryan seemed to come along. But you know what? We all gave him sort of a pass. You know, obviously it takes a little bit of time to get your foot set, your feelings down, you know, how you're going to do things with this company. But I just feel like there hasn't been a lot of positive things that have happened under the Jim Ryan era. Going to the showcase, obviously there was quite a bit of fallout from the PlayStation showcase that took place earlier this week at the time of the filming of this video. I'm not sure when you're watching it, but thank you for whenever you are watching it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't yet. We're trying to hit 500,000 subscribers here. But we watched that showcase and we saw a lot of things. There was some good stuff there. Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man's my favorite PlayStation first-party title at this point in time. I'm super looking forward to that game. Metal Gear Solid 3. I'm a diehard Metal Gear fan up until the 5th one and that whole situation. Queefer Sutherland, get that out of here. But remaking Metal Gear Solid 3, re-releasing Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3, along with the MSX versions of Metal Gear on modern platforms. Great stuff. Some interesting third-party stuff there. But there was a clear lack of direction with this presentation, because at this presentation, only one first-party title had a 2023 release date. And it didn't even have a release date. It had a release window of fall of 2023. And that, of course, was the aforementioned Spider-Man 2. What are all these other first-party Sony companies doing? We saw absolutely nothing from them. There were tons of games that definitely felt a bit like filler. Tons of games that were essentially third-party games that were multi-platform games that could have been shown at something like a Summer Games Fest, which of course is happening in a few weeks. It had been over 600 days since PlayStation did a PlayStation Showcase, not a state of play, a PlayStation Showcase, meaning that a showcase is the big to-do. It's the big, long thing. It's the thing where all the bangers are supposed to be, and the bangers weren't there. It felt more like a state of play, which is something that we commonly get. So lots of people were left with questions, and some PlayStation fans weren't even happy with Spider-Man 2 because they felt like there wasn't enough changes going on with that game. You know, it looked way too similar to the first game. I didn't think that at all. That's a day one buy for me. But people questioned, you know, the visual fidelity of the game because this is just a PlayStation 5 game. It's not like Miles Morales was, which was a multi-platform game. People are asking questions about Spider-Man 2. And I think rightfully so. You know, you should be a little bit skeptical with any game from any company. Yes, even if it's Nintendo or, you know, a Zelda game. I was skeptical with Tears of the Kingdom until that final trailer. But at least they have a little bit of time with Spider-Man 2. But what else is there? You couldn't show me off anything else. All these people, you know, hyped up the PlayStation Showcase. PlayStation fans, people that are, you know, gaming news channel, John Spawnwave. You had Mystic Ryan on the channel. You did this big video. Oh, yeah, Factions is going to be worse. Factions wasn't there. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think one of the interesting fallouts from the showcase is it really showed you who was a real PlayStation fan and who's just a simp for the company that just wants to get in good with PlayStation or wants to look good with the company. Because the whole timeline, there was people saying, you know, if you didn't like this presentation, you're a POS. And I'm like, what? I thought the general consensus was that this was definitely not worth the wait. That's why you have real PlayStation fans out there like Jack Move Johnny and BG, Broken Games HD. People that, you know, they should probably have a bigger following than they have because they kept it real. They're diehard PlayStation fans. They were super looking forward to it. They're hyping it up. And when it did not meet their expectations, they rightfully said, hey, this sucked. You know, so I like them because, you know, people kind of say, oh, well, RGT's a Nintendo YouTuber or whatever. But if there's a bad director or a director I don't like, I say it. I've always done that. And there's the problem is separating the preference people from the diehard fanboys, but they did a great job talking about all this stuff and letting their emotions out and showing that this is not the Sony that they fell in love with. This is not the Sony that has been, you know, one of the leaders in video games. Let's talk about PlayStation VR stuff. I'm a PlayStation VR 2 owner. I got it on day freaking one. I played Horizon. I didn't like it. I played Gran Turismo 7. Freaking loved it. I played the Star Wars game. Freaking loved it. But I was like, okay, where's the PSVR 2 stuff? Why did I spend $600 on this on day one? I'm sure they'll show me something at this PlayStation presentation. They showed me Resident Evil 4 VR, which should have been available on day one with the release of the game. I don't know if I'm going to go back and play through it again in VR. You know, depending on when it comes out, maybe if there's nothing else going on. They showed some generic looking first-person shooters, and that was it. You're not instilling confidence in people with presentations that have, you know, games that aren't really system sellers, games that are multi-platform games, and a severe limit of first-party games, plus not having anything really for PlayStation VR 2 to really bring people into your ecosystem. But it doesn't really matter because your system sales are going very well. But there's something I kind of want to circle back to with all this because now there's a new narrative going on around. Oh, you didn't hear? PlayStation held back games. There's lots of games that are near completion and ready to go, but they didn't show them at this showcase. And people are listening to this narrative. And people are, the crazy thing is people are believing this narrative. Are you out of your damn mind? Have you lost all sensibility? Why in the holy name of God would Sony be like, you know what? We've got one first-party game at this presentation. It's Spider-Man 2, a game that people already know about. We're so confident in this game that we can't even give it an official release date. We'll just have to say a fall window. But that might be too much for people. We don't want to put, I don't know, 2 or 3 games with, you know, gameplay in them that are first-party games that are nearly done. No, it'll be sensory overload. We need to hold back. It had been over 600 damn days since the last presentation. And you're going to sit there and tell me that Sony was like, we can't do too much. Xbox is coming up. Got the Xbox presentation coming up. We don't want to blow our load and then Xbox has even more stuff. No! That makes no sense! Because right now, timetable-wise, we know of one game for 2023. Spider-Man 2. It's coming out in the fall. Doesn't even have a release date yet. But no, if they would have added more games, it would have been too much stuff, too much for people to handle, would have been overwhelming. We needed this hour-plus presentation with a bunch of CGI trailers and title card drops, weird indie cat games, and we can't show too many first-party games. If you believe that, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Like, okay, if you believe that, these Power Ranger pogs I have in this bag right here are worth $1 million. So give me $1 million, because evidently you'll believe anything, because there's no, that makes no sense. Because as much as we want Sony and PlayStation to be in competition with each other, they're not. They're going down two different paths, completely different paths, and anyone with eyes can see that. I think even someone without eyes, a blind person, could see that. Xbox is going towards a subscription service, and Sony's trying to go for the single player experience, and now trying to add games as a service to their lineup of games. Like that's just factual. But no, they held back games, and I'm sure one of the games that they held back was Factions 2, right? You know, the sequel to The Last of Us multiplayer, that when The Last of Us 2 came out, they weren't quite ready to have Factions 2 release, and it's been like 3+ years and we still haven't seen anything from Factions 2 except for like some artwork. Well, I'm sure that was one of the games they held back, right? Oh, you fools. You fools. This right here, which happened after the narrative dropped about this whole thing of holding back games, this happened after the narrative dropped. So let's go over it together. We know many of you have been looking forward to hearing more about The Last of Us multiplayer game. We're incredibly proud of this job our studio has done thus far, but as development has continued, we've realized what is best for the game is to give it more time. Our team will continue to work on the project, as well as other games in development, including a brand new single-player experience. We look forward to sharing more soon. We're grateful to our fantastic community for your support. Thank you for your passion for our games. It continues to drive us, and you have those same dick riders. That's really all you could call some of these people. Trying to get in go with the company, say, take your time, Naughty Dog, take your time, Sony, this, that, the other. We just want a good experience. They're the ones who said that Factions 2 was going to be a thing. They're the ones who put that into the people's minds. You released The Last of Us Part 1, a brand new IP with a single player and a multiplayer component, both of which were very high quality. Even though I'm not a huge fan of The Last of Us, I played a lot of Factions after I was done with the single player of the game. But you expect us to believe with the sequel that things are going to be similar, and you're working on Factions, but when the game comes out, it's not quite ready yet. 3 years later, it's not quite ready yet. But they're holding back games. This was one of the games they were holding back. I want to end this video by going in a completely different direction. And this might be something that I actually make a full video on one day. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a full video on this. But I just have to look at the video game industry and see exactly what is happening, because this isn't just a Sony problem. Okay, there's tons of third-party studios that are having the same thing. Xbox has been having the same sort of problems forever. Nintendo, not so much, but I'll explain why in just a minute. It's because of the size of the video game industry right now that things are the way they are. And I honestly feel like things are going to get a lot worse before they get a lot better. A crash of sorts, not to the level of 1983's crash or anything like that, but which really was only a United States-based thing because video games were fine in the UK and Japan. But basically a situation where a lot of these companies go under. A lot of these companies disappear. A lot of these properties, these IPs disappear. Development times become longer and longer for games, and there's huge gaps between when we get new games from these first-party studios. And let me tell you guys why. When you look at 1995, take 1995, for example, versus where we are in 2023. Right now, there are 3 video game platforms. There's the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series systems, and the Nintendo Switch. Yes, you could also say PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but let's just say those. So now we have 5 platforms. Those are 5 active platforms. In 1995, you had 3 active Sega platforms with the Genesis 32X and the Sega CD. That's, oh no, 4, excuse me, because you also had the Sega Saturn. Holy crap. Okay, so you had 4 from one company. Nintendo. You had the Super NES, which was still coming out with games. You had the Nintendo 64 coming out the next year, so you're obviously moving towards that. But even taking that away, you also had the Game Boy. Sega also had the Game Gear. Sega had 5 platforms of their own. You had PlayStation with the PlayStation 1, you had 3DO, you had the Neo Geo, you had the Atari Jaguar, you had the Atari Lynx. All of these systems were out, yet all of these systems still had quality first-party titles coming at a consistent rate. But these systems also had shorter lifespans. You know, there wasn't a thing called a 10-year life cycle of a system. You were lucky to get 5 or 6. You always were moving on to the next thing. But video games were still at a relative stage there where if a game sold 500,000 copies, people could eat off that for a very long time because of the development costs were less. So where am I going with this? The rise of development costs, the rise of this technology is creating an ecosystem for the video game industry where you make one wrong misstep, your whole company could vanish in a second. That's why we're seeing all these remasters come back from an era when you could actually take a bit of a risk. And if it didn't work out completely well, it was okay. You still had other IPs and titles that were being created alongside of those games because your development time was shorter. Your development costs were smaller. But we keep going for bigger and better and more and more and more. And it's causing a situation where these games aren't ready to be released. So you have these gaps in time where there's no games. And these gaps are going to continue to get longer and longer and longer. You might be saying, well, won't it eventually catch up with these games? No. Because now you're starting to see projects get canceled. Now you're starting to realize that when a project gets announced, it doesn't necessarily mean that that project is in development. Because I guarantee you that they didn't start working on Factions 2 until well after The Last of Us 2 was released. Until the Last of Us 2 patch came out, then they started working on Factions. Working on something doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming right around the corner anymore. And then, like I said, you have Nintendo, who, being a generation behind, they're okay with this. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was admittedly their biggest and most expensive game ever to develop. Look at the turnaround time for that game. Tears of the Kingdom came out in, Breath of the Wild came out in 2017. Tears of the Kingdom came out in 2023. You know, it took a while for that game to come out. It took 7 years for that game to come out. But you had all these smaller games because you look at Nintendo file sizes, and they're smaller, but you have a consistent lineup of games. Whether you like the games or not, you know, that's up to you. But maybe Nintendo has had this right with being a bit behind in the hardware side of things, because the bigger these games get, the more expensive they get, the more risk and liability you run with these games. And if people don't buy your games, your studio goes under, your studio closes. How many studios has Xbox closed? How many studios has Sony closed? And when you look at Sony right now, you have one first-party game for 2023 with Spider-Man 2. Hopefully that doesn't get delayed. And then what do you have? What do you have? It's very strange, man. It's very strange. You know, I hope that Sony is holding stuff back. I'm a PlayStation 5 owner. I'm an Xbox owner. I'm a Nintendo Switch owner. I want to be swimming in new titles, in new IPs, and new innovative ideas, and new games. But it's pretty dry right now. Thank God for the third-party companies. Thank God for Street Fighter 6, Final Fantasy 16, AEW Fight Forever. It's going to be a solid June. But imagine those third-party companies take a risk that sinks their company. And now they're gone. Man, things to think about. I've gone way too long. I didn't plan on this being a nearly 20-minute video, but I had a lot of stuff to say. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from this video. And I hope, even if you disagree with me, I hope you at least understand where I'm coming from and my perspective on things. Because I feel like, you know, looking at the history of gaming and the past of gaming, and, you know, looking at a year like 1995, when you had like 15 different platforms on the marketplace, versus 5 now, and you look at the output of games you had in 1995 versus the output of games now, it's really very telling about the industry potentially just growing too fast too soon. And is that going to be a problem in the near future? Are we already starting to see the ramifications of that? You know, because Sony's not the only one. We've been saying stuff about Xbox just like this. And Nintendo, what the hell do they have? We have Pikmin 4, and then we have a mystery. Are we even getting a Nintendo Direct next month? We could be. But if that Nintendo Direct comes out, and it's just Pikmin 4, and nothing else for the rest of the year, we're going to be having the same damn conversation about Nintendo. I've taken up enough of your guys' time. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Shout outs to you if you made it through the end of this video. Like I said, didn't plan on it going for super long, but now I'm almost at 20 minutes, so I'm just going to go for 20 minutes. I want to at least hit 20 minutes. I rarely go over this sort of time, although tomorrow's video might actually go over the 20-minute mark too, because I have a lot of stuff for you guys to look at with that. But thank you guys for your constant support. If you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, share this video around with your friends if you enjoyed what I had to say, or if you think I'm completely wrong, because a hate watch is still a watch and it's still money in my pocket. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.